All right, welcome everyone. It's a small group. Hopefully there's a few people able to join us online, but I know it's the week after spring break, so people are spending some time in the field. So it's my pleasure today to introduce John LaRiviere. He is here from Scoot Science, which is a company that he is the CEO of. John got his BS in geology from James Madison University and then a master's degree from Southern Illinois. Both of those were in geology. And then he did a PhD at UC Santa Cruz in ocean sciences, which is where I met John. We overlapped actually for not very much time, but just enough time that when you're from the same lab, you sort of get together at every single meeting after that. So during his time at UC Santa Cruz, his work was focused on paleoceanography, and he published several papers on the Miocene and what we can learn from warm climates and the relationship between CO2 and warm climates. After his PhD, he spent about 4 years at Santa Clara University as an adjunct faculty member. And during that time, I remember we had lots of meetings. You were already starting to think about what could a company look like. So he's really spent a lot of time thinking about, you know, what are the skill sets that he acquired during a PhD in paleoceanography, and how do you apply that to sort of modern oceanographic problems. So he's going to obviously tell us about that work today, but essentially he's taking his understanding of climate variability and climate change through time, and ocean variability and change through time, and the skill sets that he learned in terms of data management, and is applying those to really modern problems and questions in aquaculture. So, oh, you have your own mic, so I'm going to put this back.
Yeah, thanks so much, Petra, and thanks for having me. Thanks for coming to the seminar. I was delighted to learn about the aquaculture program here. I live in Capitola, so I'm nearby, and it's like kind of beyond exciting to see, wait a second, like we have people paying attention to aquaculture locally, and so I'm really happy to have an opportunity to be here today. The talk is set up primarily around the process of getting a business up and running from an oceanography background, and from a background really paying attention to ocean data. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process that Scoot's co-founders and I went through, going from science background into a business that generates revenue and helps helps our customers get value from ocean observing, right? And so I've learned from working in Scoot for the past several years, actually one of the best things to do at the very beginning of the talk is I'm gonna show you what our product is, what we sell, right? Just right off the bat. Scoot, if you're an oceanographer, like you might recognize that double O in Scoot stands for ocean observing. We were initially a consulting group called Santa Cruz Ocean Observing Team. And we started, it was myself, Evan Goodwin, and Ralph Till. We had all been in graduate school at UCSC together. We started actually back in 2013 saying, I think what we could do consulting, you know, as our careers, we could do consulting where we help customers get data out of the ocean and make that data useful. And so actually the original business plan for Scoot was that we were going to have a few gliders, buoyancy-driven gliders, and we would travel around the world and get them in the water and collect data for people who needed subsurface ocean data. And we were like, this is going to be sweet because it's fun to go out on the water, and we probably can get the company to like buy a rib and a trailer, and like that'll be so fun. That was our business plan initially. But what we found very quickly is, you know, we found a lot of businesses in the ocean space that are struggling to navigate ocean variability and ocean change, and there probably was a bigger opportunity for us to work on than this 3-person consulting group. So 2013 is when we were like, getting our budget together for like, we need a truck, a trailer, a cool boat, and then some gliders. But then we built, eventually this company, Scoot. We dropped the Santa Cruz Ocean Observing Team. We focus on helping aquaculture operators navigate extreme ocean events. So helping them navigate and get increased lead time for things like low oxygen water masses or extreme temperature swings or plankton blooms, all the kinds of extreme events that, that actually like hurt fish welfare and kill fish. We thought we should be able to help them navigate that with an oceanography background. So this is actually a live farm from one of our customers. It's anonymized, so it's called Site Rodney. But this is a farm from one of the top 5 salmon farming companies in the world, so a pretty big company. And what you're looking at is all of the ocean observations that they have on a site. So they have sensors in the water measuring oxygen saturation and oxygen concentration. This is a time series, the last week or so. And then they have folks going out and making manual measurements through the water column every day. They're out collecting temperature and salinity and oxygen, and then actually they're taking discrete samples and doing microscope work for plankton, and they're monitoring lots of different aspects of fish health at the sites. What we provide customers is this platform called Sea State. It's a common operating picture that integrates all of the ocean observing that they're doing on the farms with the surrounding oceanography and the surrounding meteorology, so that they can sit and have discussions as a team around the operations that they, and you know, the way I think of it is they sit down and they look at this collected set of ocean conditions, this background state, and say, what can we do for the biology today to nudge conditions in the favor of like high fish welfare and fish that are living sort of healthy lives until we kill them, right? Because we're going to harvest them and take them out of the water. And we're at the point now where if you take all the ocean observing that these sites have, we can take the atmospheric forecast. So these are 10-day ensembles from the GFS, and we can start to drive ocean forecasts for them. You can see, this is funny, you can see like this ocean forecast is saying we're gonna have like, over 3 trillion saturation of oxygen right here. If you look at the ensemble right here, like there's so much uncertainty in the ensemble and these kind of crazy realizations that lead the ocean model to go way out of bounds for something reasonable. But this is the kind of information that fish farms are starting to use now on a daily basis to decide sort of how they're gonna run their farm sites. Right? So that's what, so this, we can look at the platform more a little later, but that's what Scoot does. We provide this software that gives farms an integrated overview of all the conditions on their sites and gives them forecasting and gives them fish welfare analytics and gives them tools so that they can navigate really a digital twin of their farm site. Also, if anyone has questions while we're doing the talk, it's a really small group, so you can just ask questions as we're talking and so we don't have to wait until the end. When we started Scoot, I told you initially it was a consulting group, but as we started building out the business plan for the consulting group, we were finding, kind of all over the place, it seemed like there were more opportunities to help ocean operators navigate ocean risk, help them navigate ocean change. And we started pitching outside investors. None of us had any money to put into the business, so I think the initial shares, we each we each put $1 in for the initial shares, because you have to attach some money to the initial shares during like the entity formation. So we had like $3, and then we did well in a business plan competition that was hosted at CSUMB, and I think that we got $5,000 from that, and so we bought computers with the $5,000. And I was teaching, and Evan was working at Scripps, and I think Ralph was leading a band, right? Like that's how we started Scoot. And one of the things we found is, we think there's an opportunity here to help marine operators navigate ocean risk, manage this ocean data. We have to raise money. And so we started fundraising from venture capitalists and angel investors. And part of the pitch initially for this was looking at the total market space that's going to be affected by ocean variability and climate change, and making the case to investors that there is a lot of opportunity in the ocean space. Give us money to figure out what opportunities there are and to build a business, right? And so we started from this like really abstract, like the estimates of the full size of the ocean economy is, into the trillions. So you'd start there and say like, to any of the investors, I know you're not familiar with maritime, I know you're not familiar with ocean markets, especially in the US, but there's a huge market out there that's somehow related to the ocean. And the ocean is on the front line of climate change. I think it's interesting. I saw, just this morning on my phone in the New York Times, they have one of the top articles today is about the ocean warmth. Like you've probably been seeing that the ocean temperatures this year are, I think it's approaching like a degree above the averages for the last like 4 years. It's really high. It's over half a degree this year alone. And the case that we would make as we were starting to teach investors was like any ocean operation, if it's feeling climate change more acutely than what we see on land, any ocean operation is going to be dealing with increasingly volatile conditions. And that makes ocean businesses risky. It makes ocean businesses susceptible to climate change. We can build a business out of helping groups manage that risk. And the next point that we would make is that if you look at the way capital flows into the ocean economy, right, there is very limited lending, investing, and access to cash. It's so mind-boggling that for this massive economy, right, you see very difficult conditions for businesses that are trying to get a bank loan or get. Earlier this morning, we were talking about private equity, and that's because that becomes a way that you fund businesses, right? Venture capital, just unconstrained risk for ocean operators means that whatever someone is trying to do from a business standpoint on the ocean, it's inherently risky, and that's on top of this background of increasing volatility. And so we started focusing in this area. And when we were doing customer discovery, these oceanographers out just talking to anyone that they can in ocean industries and learning about like, what's it like to run your business? What do you struggle with? How do you work with ocean data? What we found was there was a lot of need to help businesses shift from this idea of like kind of the ocean's a black box, but because I'm an ocean operator, I come from like a long line of, I feel like the attitude is like that of like a whaling expedition. Like they're gonna leave and they might never come back, but we just accept that. That's how we run our business. It might fall apart because it's risky and there's some pride there, right? But we were seeing that, wait a second, like you should be able to move away from this ocean as a black box because we're getting more and more data describing ocean variability every day, right? So we went off and talked to folks in shipping and folks that are responsible for running ports and folks in wild fisheries, and just anyone that had infrastructure in the ocean, we talked to and try to learn about how do you use ocean data, how risky is your business, how is your bottom line affected by ocean climate change. And what we found was that aquaculture was this really interesting nexus where it's a critical piece of getting low carbon protein out to the world's population. So you look at aquaculture in the US, it's like not very well established, ocean-based aquaculture, right? So mariculture in the US, like you don't really have a very big market. But when you go to other countries, you see like there's actually a pretty big salmon farming industry, and there's pretty big shellfish farming industry. And when you go start looking all around the world, there is so much coastline that's available for sustainable protein production. But I was telling you, it's really hard to get cash into these industries to build that into ocean industries and build up aquaculture. So it's like this funny thing. It's a critical part of like UN Sustainable Development Goals to have more aquaculture, that's sustainable aquaculture around the world. And also, it's just going to be hard to get the funding behind it to make this a viable low carbon protein source. So we found that, and we found that right now, like give or take, you would say marine aquaculture is about a $60 billion market. I think it's really interesting because I think at any given time, there's probably more like $100 billion of asset in the water. Like if you think about the fish and their grow out cycles, it's more than what you actually land each year. There's a lot of capital sitting in the water in the existing aquaculture market, and it should be growing, right? But these aquaculture producers are dealing with that major ocean volatility, right? So you can see, I think when we were getting started, Chile had, it was in 2016, Chile had big problems with plankton blooms. 2016, yeah. And they lost like $800 million of fish over a few weeks. And you can see these headlines here. It's like this mix of sometimes you had aquaculture companies losing fish because of high temperatures. Sometimes you had them losing fish because of low temperatures. Sometimes you had groups losing fish because of jellyfish blooms. Sometimes you had them losing fish because of plankton blooms. And for every case, when you dug in with those companies, you would find that they really didn't have a good handle on how likely it was that any one farm would be affected by this risk, and the risks were becoming more frequent and more severe every year. So you take like this major need for aquaculture to like be a pillar of food security around the planet, and then overlay like marine volatility actually screwing up your ability to raise and farm fish around the world. And then what we found as we were digging into this market is that we could start to quantify the typical losses that you'd see at a farm because of ocean volatility, and that the losses of the farms were going up every year, and we could see it in the most basic way by running simulations of farms on modern ocean conditions. So you take like maps, we would take reanalyses of oxygen and temperature for the last 20 years, last 10 years, and we would simulate a farm on top of that and just say we know there are likely mortality events that are going to pop up if oxygen dips below this value or if temperature gets knocked out of this window. And when we did that, you took like actual ocean data and a simulated farm, you would see monthly cash flows just completely walloped by increasing ocean volatility. And that became sort of the focal point for Scoot as we were building the company, because we said, well, we really want to help people manage ocean risk and work with ocean data to better run their companies, even amidst a changing climate, and pretty critical for our team is like our mission is to improve the relationship between humans and the ocean, which means we're gonna hold all these companies accountable for the like maximum transparency you could have running this business on the ocean. Like you have all the ingredients here to increase the sustainability and also increase transparency and also help these groups navigate like tough ocean conditions. And then that was our pitch. We found this in the first years of building Scoot, like if there's an opportunity to get, and it's kind of funny, like to bring value out of our ocean observing that we have around the world, there is a strong opportunity in aquaculture. And then we'd have to size out the markets when we talk to investors, and we'd say, look, we can start with farmed salmon, and then if you look at all farmed finfish in the ocean, it's a bigger market. And then if we spread from finfish into also being able to do the same work for shellfish and seaweed, it's a bigger market. And then you have to show the investors. And then at that point, because we're a rocket ship, clearly we're not just going to do aquaculture, we're going to help everyone manage ocean volatility. And look, it's a huge industry. And key for our group is excluding oil and gas, like excluding defense and excluding oil and gas, because that didn't actually align with the mission of our team as we started building the company. And it was with this pitch that we raised our first outside investment. I think we started, we raised $100,000 initially in the first round. And then from 100, we got up to a few $100,000. And then ultimately, we raised about $8 million to build Scoot. And Scoot has been running, like as a standalone business entity since 2018. And at times the team, we've had a team of up to 20 people building products for Scoot. And partly we've been building the software that I showed you. And also a lot of what we did at Scoot a few years ago before the markets changed is we focused on, well, could we help these fish farms not only manage their operations, but could we help them take all that data I showed you in the Sea State platform and turn it into risk solutions? You can think of that as insurance for these extreme ocean events. And if we turn that data in the platform into insurance with the farms, where you can actually say, like, this farm is very risky, and so it has kind of expensive insurance, but that insurance is going to help this operator manage risky conditions. This farm over here is less risky. It's less expensive to run this farm. It's like kind of should incentivize people to run in places that can handle their operations and move away from places that are risky that would lead to a lot of fish dying, right? Once you unlock insurance, then because of some of Scoot's initial investors and what we were learning about the market, like one of the core things that I talked to you about in the beginning is it's hard to just get capital into ocean industries. We unlocked insurance, then we actually could do work in finance. We could show groups at traditional banks that by understanding the ocean conditions and how those ocean conditions couple to a business, the business outcomes, right, couple to cash flows of a business, then there should be a really clear path for funding sustainable businesses with high transparency. And that was the goal for Scoot for a long time. And what we did is we started by building a software platform, Sea State. And Sea State, on this side of the screen, you can see it takes large quantities of data, right? All this IoT data. Farms have so many sensors in the water right now. We take all that data across their different platforms, integrate it, and then take that data and use it as kind of initial conditions to drive ocean models forward. And so then we give the groups a unified platform where they can look at the ocean data and the operations data and the fish health data on the same platform, and they get ocean forecasts because they have such good ocean observing. They have ocean forecasts that they can make decisions for the next couple of weeks. How are we going to run our farm and keep the fish healthy? And then we can run welfare indices. Okay, if you have this set of ocean conditions here, how much integrated stress is it putting on the fish compared to last week or the week before? Right? I'm going to pause for, do you guys have any questions about this? This is sort of like the premise for getting the company together. Okay, so we started, and with this software, C-State, the goal was let's increase the lead time that farms have for extreme ocean events so they can run their mitigation systems and try to protect fish. So here's one of our customers, Greek Seafood. This is a farm in British Columbia. And the picture, so this picture from an airplane, you can see the wing there. You're looking down at a farm. You can see the barge, and then all of the pens or cages of the farm. There's a very severe algae bloom going on, and you can see that water is, a drastically different color outside of the farm than inside the farm. Inside the farm, they're running mitigation equipment to, this farm's running aerators and has tarps down in the water. So the tarps they're weighted tarps, sit down and try to block some of the algae out from the surface waters, but then they also have aeration at depth that you're pumping air in at depth and trying to entrain deep water up to the surface to try to dilute the surface water algae bloom out of the way and keep the conditions kind of friendly for fish here. They also will do things like skip the feeding because you get much higher survivorship in the fish if they haven't been eating recently. And these are all steps that if you had some lead time for it, then you can improve the fish welfare. You can help them weather really tough ocean conditions. Here's a picture of what it looks like when you see a tarp is down, and then you can see aerators down at 20 meters depth. And then actually there's even oxygen generators where they'll pump a mix of oxygen and air into the water, really small bubbles that you actually improve the saturation, the oxygen saturation of the water, but it's expensive to run this stuff. So the oxygen generators cost, on this scale of $1 million a piece. It takes a lot of diesel to run aeration, run generation, or the oxygen generation. And so, farms are not trying to run this equipment all the time. Really critical thing is that the ocean observing is important, because if you're running aeration and entraining deep water up to the surface to try to protect the fish, you need to be sure that the deep water is of acceptable oxygen values before you bring it up to the surface. And so lots of farms around the world are doing observations down at 25 meters or 30 meters depth now because they have accidentally killed fish by turning on aeration to try to protect the fish, and they brought low oxygen water up to the surface and killed the fish because of the mitigation step. So the goal is, can we give farms more time to run mitigation, to make decisions on the farm about how they handle, even just handling the fish adds stress to a fish where they're more susceptible to like a mortality event. So farms are actually using the C-State platform to say, well, are the ocean conditions okay right now? If so, we can probably handle the fish. We can do a treatment. Oh, are the ocean conditions stressful? And have the fish experience kind of accumulated stress over the last few weeks? And if they see, wait, the fish have been really stressed out, then they'll skip a standard treatment because they don't want to add the extra stress of handling the fish if they're already struggling against challenging ocean conditions. And the results have been pretty awesome, actually. So just by integrating all that data together and getting some of this value out of the ocean observations, we found that the background rates of mortality with our first customers dropped pretty dramatically. So we were able to see a 34% drop in background daily mortality. So that's like not mortality from an extreme event. It's just that every day when the farms are running with millions of fish, you know, 1 million fish in the water, 800,000 fish in the water at each site, there's just a background mortality rate. And that background rate dropped significantly once we had our first customers on sea state for the first year. That's really cool. So when we talk to the customers and say, you know, why did this happen? How come, you know, the background mortality rates decreased? One of the things they'll say as well, we're just all talking off the same common operating picture. We're having more efficient, like kind of informed discussions as a team. Right off the bat, one thing we do is we just hold our weekly production meetings on sea state now. And we can look at, well, what's the ocean doing compared to the fish health, compared to last week. That's like a baseline, just leveled up our ability to run our farms right now. But the other thing is, if we look at the regional ocean model, right? So this is not the site-specific models that we run, but just we are serving out the live ocean model from Parker McCready's lab at UW. If we look at just the regional ocean model, then we can see for those farms down there, we can see when there's offshore upwelling happening, and we actually started learning that it's about a 2-day teleconnection between offshore upwelling and these pixels of the regional ocean model, and when our deep water will get like a dramatic drop in oxygen. Like there's like, I don't know how to say this, sort of like this learning that happened at the farms once they had access to, you know, kind of the way an oceanographer looks at ocean conditions, right? And they say, well, like, even without the site-specific forecast, we've kind of tuned into, let's look at these pixels in the ROMs, and then in about 2 days, we know we're not gonna run aeration because it's gonna be pretty bad. We also see some of the farms actually sit within the model domain of existing physics-based models, right? Like a ROMS or any of the models that you think of having access to as an oceanographer for forecasting from any of the USAs right now. Sometimes the farms are in those model domains, and you can see in this farm's example, the models do a pretty good job 3 days beforehand of showing them when temperature is going to crash and when temperature is going to recover, or when oxygen is going to drop to. So fish start, you have like cautionary conditions at about 70% saturation oxygen. You have fish dying when you get down to like 60%. And so you can see when you have overlap between these existing, you know, sort of think of any of the models you would access day to day, you can actually give farms like 3 days lead time, right? Just by giving them access to the models and kind of the information that we're used to working with every day. What we found was there's enough ocean observing going on at the sites that we can run at every site a mixed layer model. So we run GOTM for every single site now because we have temperature and salinity and oxygen at least down to 15 meters measured by these farms. And if it's not continuously being monitored, then they're measuring these essential ocean variables several times a day, 2 or 3 times a day. What that means is that we can take the farm observations, we take a pretty basic, I mean, but I wouldn't call it basic. It's sophisticated, a 1D mixing model with GOTM. And we estimate, we kind of take the ADCP data from when they first set up a farm, and we back out the tidal influence, and we do some corrections for like what I think of as like lateral mixing. But you can get a really good forecast for these farms just by saying, hey, the atmospheric forecast is saying it's going to be windy and rainy with this much cloud cover. Let's run the mixing model forward based on your measurements of the water column at each farm site. And what we found was like last year, We had 278 forecasts predicting that dissolved oxygen would drop below 70% saturation, so that's really dangerous for the fish. And of those, 252 had, I would say, like high efficacy, and that 252 of the forecasts, 3 days before the event happened, had a realization of the event happening. So it's like you take these farms with no lead time for an extreme ocean event, and then move them into 250 instances of heads up for extreme ocean events. This was across, I think, maybe 15 or 20 sites. Right? So really big improvements in their lead time for these problems. Now, plankton is also a huge issue for these farms, for these fish farms. Harmful plankton blooms are such an issue that what we see is most of the, well, all the farms in Canada, certainly, but farms in Canada and Scotland and Chile, they have technicians on the site with scopes doing plankton counts, just like you would see here, doing plankton counts at least once a day, but during a bloom up to like 3 or 4 times a day. They're doing plankton counts and identifying harmful plankton, and they have flow cams, and they're assembling image libraries, and even a couple of farms in Scotland right now are testing those in situ cameras. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're in situ cameras that can identify plankton. They're out in the water. It's flow cytometry that then goes into real-time plankton identification. Like, the farms are very sophisticated in their ocean observing, and they're dealing with issues of gill damage or toxicity, and eventually oxygen depletion, right? But this is what it looks like for a user to work with sea state for plankton entry. They actually set up sea state next to their scope. They select the species they're seeing, and they actually do the counts in sea state here. And then once they're doing the counts in sea state, this is managed across all the farm sites for the company, and anyone can access the plankton data, but we also move the plankton data into, let's see if it shows it here, like into the kinds of plots that show you the recent trends in plankton. We show, these are the plots. So we'll show like kind of recent samples. We'll show like how has the assemblage of plankton evolved over recent years. Like, you have an assemblage of plankton today. What do you expect to see based on all of the historical data? And it's a lot of data management that is like ocean-specific data management. Groups have tried to do this through like Microsoft Power BI, or they've tried to like use BI solutions or spreadsheets to try to do this, and it hasn't been very effective. Like, so the groups with plankton issues are really happy to be able to look like, can we look inside the mitigation system versus outside the mitigation system? And remember, you're like, sometimes plankton aren't toxic until they hit a certain concentration, right? And so just the presence of the plankton isn't really the issue. It's like the concentration, the time of year, other factors that are leading to stress on the fish. This is something that, like, more broadly, we've started hearing a little bit about just in the research world, that plankton researchers, anyone doing observational measurements, is trying to like build this kind of system in their labs and like run this through spreadsheets. And I think like we have some question just broadly, like, who else wants to use this outside of aquaculture, right? And so I will like put, that's kind of my pitch for, if you know anyone who does plankton research, there is a very sophisticated system for managing plankton data and looking at and making the plankton data useful, that the aquaculture industry and venture capital has funded, right? So I think we put that out there. The first project that we did in British Columbia, the farms all got together. They had one shared plankton data set, because they really want to share these ocean observations and plankton observations with the general public, but it's hard to do because they're fish farmers, they're not data scientists, they're not focused on how to disseminate data. And so they said, hey, we have a really big plankton data set. Can you help us make sense of it? And the first data set that they gave us was 105 sites with that level of rigor of plankton monitoring, starting from the year 2000. I think it is the highest resolution like plankton data set that exists anywhere in the world, like spatially. I think like British Columbia has so much ocean observing, and they said, just we have all this plankton data. We don't know what it means. We don't know what's happening here. We can't even actually share the data with people because it's sort of messy and hard to work with. So that was the first project that Scoot did. So we built software to help them manage this, and we were able to show that different areas around British Columbia were seeing kind of the harmful plankton at different times of the year, and you could start to expect if you're in this part of BC, then you'll have a harmful assemblage showing up, typically this time of year. And you can start to say, is that happening earlier than it used to? Is it happening more frequently than it used to? And it varies based on where you are around BC. We, for the first time, showed them that they had so much data, they could start to look at the plankton blooms, like in this space of like, what's the depth of the bloom? How is plankton evolving, not just at the surface, but through the water column? And how does that match up with this issue of plankton pushing into harmful oxygen conditions that kill the fish? So this is all the kind of work that we got into. So there's details here. I can see we're at about 45 minutes, so I'll wrap up. But there's a lot of details and a lot of analytics in the platform that we built. And it all, again, came out of this idea that like the first step to helping ocean operators manage and navigate changing ocean conditions is going to be to build out the ability to navigate the details of their business and how those details couple to the ocean conditions. And once you do that, it can unlock all these other pieces that are critical for, in my mind, growing that I don't remember, trillions and trillions of dollars of ocean economy moving forward. So I think I'll wrap it up there. That's what Scoot does, and happy to take any questions.
So for the Zoom people, we're going to use the mic if there are questions. So, any questions?
Very interesting talk. So I work with different ocean observing systems, and one thing we found is that it's hard to make a dashboard that works for everybody. Some users are more sophisticated, and some aquaculture farmers who are on the water just want a static JPEG that is up to date. How do you deal with that when designing your platform?
Yeah. Should I talk into the mic as well? Oh, I'm good. I'm mic'd for Zoom. Yeah. What we found is even within an organization, there's like pretty wide levels of how deep people want to get into the data. It's been really interesting. We thought initially with like, let's say the forecasts, we thought, oh, what we need to show is like, we need to show them error and uncertainty in the forecasts, and like, let's get that published for the farmers. And actually, there's a lot less concern in those things that you think of typically, like from a science standpoint, and more just saying like, qualitatively, like, can you help us understand? Can we trust the forecast? But we don't really need to know the numbers attached to it. So that has been like a big part of the learning curve in design, like product design for us. But I would say unquestionably one of the things that we learned was you have to dig into the details of how the business runs and the behavior that like someone takes every single day for them to use the product. And so a lot of the detail that sits in C-state was necessary to get usage. And I think like to your question, like some people just want like a snapshot and other people want to have the tools so that they can do their own analyses. even if it's someone who just wants a snapshot, it was very critical for us to spend time, and we still spent a lot of time with them, learning like, okay, if I give you a snapshot, what does that mean? Like, you get this snapshot picture from me, what does it mean that you're gonna do in the next hour of your job, right? And it was like, understanding that detail that sort of helped us attenuate how much detail shows up in the platform. So that, and I would recommend that for anyone building products out of any of the ocean data that sits, available from the USAs or from individual labs. It's like the amount of time you need to spend with who you think your end user is very, 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 very high, because you have to almost like spend the day understanding, oh, like if they read my email report in the morning, then it means that they're not going to go to their next meeting. They're actually going to call someone else up and get together and make a decision about like how much feed they're going to put out for the morning. So,
Can I ask a follow-up question? So do you, for each farm, do you individualize the platform, or is it just this is the platform and you sort of individualize how you teach them to use the platform?
We do a little bit, but what we found is we had some core design partners in the beginning. So I would say I can name Grieg Seafood, so it's one of the top 10 salmon producers, and Cermak, which is also one of the top 10 salmon producers. They had so much, and still have so much time with us around design of the platform, that we found like, yeah, we adjust and tweak the platform based on that input, but then new customers coming on are actually excited to adopt. They're excited to adopt the practices that Grieg and Cermak have. So they're like, oh, can you tell us the sampling depths that we should put our sensors at? And then we can say, from all the work that we did, yeah, you want to get your sensors at 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, and especially down at 25 meters. And then new customers are saying, great, I learned from that. Now we're going to invest in sensors.
There's a question from Zoom that I'm just going to read to you.
Yeah.
So from Matt Hess, he says, this is fantastic. It reminds me a lot of what the Climate Corporation offers terrestrial farmers. You mentioned insurance and investment. Do you plan to take your company in that direction, continue to build out your data service, or some combination of both?
Yeah, we did. So actually, a few years ago, we designed a parametric risk product. So it's an insurance product that would pay the fish farmers just based on the ocean temperature. So it wasn't looking at like, did fish die on the farm sites? It was, let's look at frequency and severity of this one ocean temperature that we know kills fish. And then by quantifying that frequency and severity, we can get insurers to come in and say, listen, like, we will cap your downside risk. We will protect you against those temperatures. You don't even have to show us that fish died. So we've done a lot of work. We've done work around helping groups figure out the right place to position their sites in new areas, or how risky it would be if they started farming in new areas. I will say, though, that the uptake, and if you dig into Climate Corp, you kind of see this with Climate Corp too, like, there are, what's possible on the product side for managing climate and weather risk right now doesn't always totally match with what the market conditions incentivize people to do. And so, like, right now, the market is not, it's not in a set of conditions where you see a lot of people trying to get funding. So all, like, this whole part of like risk and finance right here, the industry right now is not clamoring for bank loans. And if they're not clamoring for bank loans, then they're not going to be trying to cap the downside risk with insurance products. So we will do it again when the market heats up in this way, where groups are like, okay, we think we can expand, we have to get a solution in place. And Climate Corp, when you dig into the details of Climate Corp, they've dealt with a lot of like these kind of external market conditions really becoming a driver on like insurance uptake and the financing side of things. And I think like we're ready to do more of it, but we're kind of waiting.
Any more questions in the room? Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
It was fun to visit.